Hello friends. I can see 90% of my viewers don't subscribe while watching videos. Please hit the subscribe button and like this video. Press that bell icon for notifications. And tell me in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Your support means everything to me. Now let's start with today's story. My name is Amelia Hartmann. 20 years ago, I was nothing more than a ghost haunting the hallways of Westfield High. Today, I am the woman whose words can topple empires with a single keystroke. But to understand how I became the journalist who could make or break reputations with nothing but truth and a deadline, you need to know about the day I died inside those school walls. It was a Tuesday in October when my world shattered like cheap glass. I remember every agonizing detail, because trauma has a way of burning memories into your soul with surgical precision. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the cafeteria, casting that sickly yellow glow that made everyone look like they belonged in a morgue. I sat alone at my usual table in the corner, surrounded by towers of textbooks that served as my fortress against the cruelty of teenage social hierarchy. My lunch tray held the same sad contents as always. A wilted sandwich that looked like it had given up on life, an apple with more bruises than a boxer after 12 rounds, and chocolate milk that had probably expired during the previous semester. But I was not really eating. I was reading, losing myself in the pages of investigative journalism that would later become my Bible. That was when she appeared. Sabrina Cole moved through the cafeteria like a queen surveying her kingdom. Golden hair cascaded down her shoulders in perfect waves that defied both gravity and logic. Her smile was weapon-sharp, designed to cut down anyone who dared to exist in her shadow. She wore her popularity like armor, and everyone knew she was untouchable. Everyone except me, apparently, because I made the fatal mistake of existing in her line of sight. "Oh my God," she announced to her court of followers, her voice carrying across the cafeteria like a death sentence. "Look at Amelia Hartmann over there." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. The book in my hands suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. Around me, conversations died like flowers in winter as every head turned toward my corner table. "She is practically invisible," Sabrina continued, her words dripping with theatrical cruelty. "I mean seriously, does anyone even know she exists? She sits there every day like some kind of ghost, hiding behind those dusty old books. No friends, no life, nothing. Just invisible." The laughter that followed felt like acid rain on my soul. It started as a ripple from her inner circle, then spread outward like a plague until the entire cafeteria was consumed by it. 300 students, all laughing at the girl who dared to be different. All laughing at me. I felt my face burn with shame so intense it could have powered the entire school. My hands trembled as I tried to focus on the words in my book, but they blurred together like watercolors in the rain. The laughter echoed off the walls, growing louder and more vicious with each passing second. "Invisible Amelia," someone called out. "Ghost girl," shouted another. "Does she even have a voice?" The names hit me like physical blows, each one leaving invisible bruises that would take decades to heal. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the linoleum floor, and escape the nightmare that had become my reality. But there was nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide from the truth that Sabrina had just spoken into existence. I was invisible. For the rest of high school, that moment defined me. The nickname stuck like a curse that followed me through every hallway, every classroom, every moment of my teenage existence. Teachers looked through me as if I were made of glass. Classmates spoke around me as if I were furniture. Even my own reflection seemed to fade a little more each day. I learned to embrace the shadows because the light hurt too much. But something remarkable happened in those dark corners where I lived. I discovered that invisible people see everything. While others performed for attention, I observed. While they created drama, I documented truth. While they lived in the spotlight, I learned the power that comes from watching, listening, and understanding the world from the outside. I became a student of human nature. Every cruel word, every whispered secret, every moment of vulnerability that people thought no one was watching. I saw it all. I began to understand that the world was built on layers of deception, and that truth was often the most invisible thing of all. The day I graduated from Westfield High, I made myself a promise. I would never be invisible again. But more importantly, I would make sure that the invisible truths of the world would be seen. I would become the eyes that saw everything, the voice that spoke for those who could not speak, and the pen that wrote the stories others were afraid to tell. I chose journalism not because I loved writing, but because I understood that information was the only weapon that could level the playing field between the powerful and the powerless. College was my chrysalis. At Northwestern University, I shed my skin like a snake outgrowing its past. I threw myself into my studies with the fury of someone who had been silenced for too long. I learned investigative techniques that would make detectives jealous. I mastered the art of disappearing into crowds, of asking the right questions to the right people at the right moments. My professors called me gifted, but they could not understand the truth. I was not gifted. I was forged in the fire of humiliation and tempered by years of observation. Every skill I developed was born from necessity, every technique honed by the desperate need to matter. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in journalism and a minor in criminal justice. More importantly, I graduated with a hunger that could not be satisfied by ordinary stories or surface-level reporting. I wanted the stories that mattered, the truths that powerful people worked overtime to bury. My first job was at a small newspaper in Chicago, covering local politics. It was not glamorous work, but it was perfect training ground for what I would later become. I spent my days in city council meetings, my nights digging through public records, my weekends following paper trails that led to corruption and cover-ups. Within 6 months, I had exposed a city councilman who was embezzling funds from a children's hospital. The story made front-page news and launched my career into orbit. From Chicago, I moved to Washington, D.C., then to New York, then to London. Each move brought bigger stories, higher stakes, and more dangerous enemies. I investigated arms dealers in Eastern Europe, exposed human trafficking rings in Southeast Asia, and brought down pharmaceutical companies that put profits before patients. My byline became synonymous with truth, justice, and consequences. By the time I turned 35, I had won 3 Pulitzer Prizes, a Peabody Award, and enough enemies to populate a small country. My apartment walls were covered with front-page stories that had changed laws, toppled governments, and saved lives. I had become everything I had dreamed of during those lonely lunch periods at Westfield High. I was no longer invisible. I was inevitable. But the universe has a twisted sense of humor, and karma is a patient architect. It was a Wednesday afternoon in March when my editor, Marcus Rodriguez, dropped the file on my desk. The manila envelope landed with the weight of destiny, though I could not have known it at the time. "New assignment," he said, his voice carrying that edge of excitement that meant we had stumbled onto something big. High-profile lifestyle coach, built an empire on self-help seminars and personal transformation. Multiple allegations of fraud, fake charities, embezzlement. The works. I opened the file with the casual interest of someone who had seen it all before. Financial documents, testimonials, promotional materials. All the usual suspects in a white-collar crime investigation. But then I reached the bio page, and my world stopped spinning. The photograph was professional, polished, and devastating in its perfection. Golden hair still cascaded in perfect waves. The smile was still weapon-sharp. The eyes still held that familiar cruelty disguised as confidence. But it was the name that hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Sabrina Cole. 20 years later, and she was still trying to be the center of attention. Only now, instead of ruling a high school cafeteria, she was running a multi-million-dollar empire built on helping other people transform their lives. The irony was so sharp it could have cut diamond. The girl who had called me invisible was now making millions by teaching others how to be seen. I stared at that photograph for what felt like hours, my mind racing through 2 decades of buried memories. The laughter in the cafeteria, the whispered names in the hallways, the crushing weight of insignificance that had nearly destroyed me before it made me stronger. "You know her?" Marcus asked, apparently noticing my reaction. "We went to high school together," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "Personal connection could be a problem," he warned. "I can assign it to someone else if you think there might be a conflict of interest." I looked up at him and smiled the same smile I had learned from watching Sabrina all those years ago. Sharp. Dangerous. Completely in control. No conflict, I said. I am exactly the right person for this story. What Marcus could not understand was that this was not about revenge. This was about justice. This was about invisible truths finally being brought to light. This was about the girl who had once ruled through cruelty discovering that her empire was about to crumble under the weight of her own deceptions. This was about the invisible girl who had become impossible to ignore. I spent the next 6 weeks diving into Sabrina's world with the thoroughness of a surgeon and the patience of a hunter. Every seminar she had conducted, every charity she claimed to support, every testimonial she used to promote her programs. I examined it all with microscopic precision. What I found was breathtaking in its audacity. The Cole transformation empire, as she called it, was nothing more than an elaborate house of cards built on lies, manipulation, and theft. Her flagship program, Invisible to Invincible, promised to help people overcome their limitations and achieve their dreams. The irony of the name was not lost on me. For $3,000, participants received a weekend seminar filled with recycled motivational speaking and plagiarized self-help techniques. But the real crime was what happened afterward. Sabrina had convinced hundreds of vulnerable people to donate to her various charitable causes, claiming the money would go toward scholarships for underprivileged youth. The scholarships did not exist. The charities were shells. The money went straight into offshore accounts that funded Sabrina's lavish lifestyle. I interviewed former participants who had given their life savings to support causes that existed only in promotional materials. I traced financial records that showed a pattern of deception spanning nearly a decade. I uncovered testimonials that had been completely fabricated, featuring people who had never even attended her seminars. But the most damaging evidence came from her former business partner, a woman named Jennifer Walsh who had helped Sabrina build her empire before discovering the truth about where the money was going. Jennifer had kept detailed records of everything, waiting for the right moment to expose the fraud. She told me once that people want to believe in transformation so badly that they will ignore obvious red flags. Jennifer told me during our interview. She said that desperation makes people stupid, and stupid people make her rich. As I compiled the evidence, I felt a strange mixture of professional satisfaction and personal closure. This was not about settling old scores or getting revenge for high school cruelty. This was about protecting future victims from a predator who used hope as bait and transformation as a trap. This was about making sure that invisible truths could no longer be ignored. The night before the article was scheduled to publish, I sat in my apartment surrounded by 20 years of work. Awards, commendations, front-page stories. All evidence of the life I had built from the ashes of teenage humiliation. But none of them mattered as much as the story that would run in tomorrow's newspaper. I had written thousands of articles over the course of my career, but this one felt different. This one felt like destiny finally catching up with itself. I did not gloat as I put the finishing touches on the piece. I did not celebrate as I sent it to the copy desk for final editing. I simply did what I had always done. Told the truth with precision, clarity, and devastating effectiveness. The headline wrote itself. Cole Empire Crumbles, Lifestyle Guru Exposed in Massive Fraud Scheme. My byline sat directly beneath it, exactly where it belonged. The story broke at midnight on a Thursday, simultaneously across 3 major newspapers and 2 online platforms. By dawn, it had been picked up by news outlets around the world. By noon, law enforcement agencies in 4 states had opened investigations. By evening, Sabrina Cole's empire was nothing more than rubble and regret. I watched the coverage from my office, feeling a strange sense of calm as the story unfolded exactly as I had predicted. Financial experts discussed the scope of the fraud. Legal analysts debated potential sentences. Former victims shared their stories of betrayal and loss. But what struck me most was how quickly Sabrina herself disappeared from the narrative. The woman who had built her entire identity around being seen, around being the center of attention, had suddenly become invisible in her own scandal. The irony was perfect. My phone buzzed with a text message around 10 o'clock that night. Unknown number, but I recognized the desperation in the words before I even processed who had sent them. Did you have to make me look so bad? I stared at the message for a long time, remembering the girl who had stood in that cafeteria 20 years ago, and declared me invisible. I remembered the laughter that had followed, the names that had stuck, the years of believing that I did not matter. Then I typed my response, each word chosen with the same precision I brought to every story I wrote. Funny. You once said I was invisible. Now you cannot escape my name. I hit send without hesitation, then turned off my phone and closed my laptop. The girl who had once been invisible had finally been seen, and there was no going back. 6 months later, Sabrina Cole was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit theft. Her victims received partial restitution from the assets that were seized, though no amount of money could fully repair the damage she had done to their trust and hope. I covered her sentencing hearing as a professional courtesy, sitting in the back row where I had always been most comfortable. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of consequences that had finally caught up with her. The golden hair was still perfect, but the confidence was gone. The weapon-sharp smile had been replaced by something that looked almost like regret. When the judge read the sentence, Sabrina's eyes searched the courtroom until they found mine. For just a moment, we were back in that cafeteria, two teenage girls whose lives had been shaped by a single moment of cruelty. But now the roles were reversed. Now she was the one who was invisible, forgotten by a world that had moved on to the next scandal, the next headline, the next story. And I was the one whose name would be remembered. I did not stay for the aftermath. I had other stories to write, other truths to uncover, other injustices to expose. The girl who had once been called invisible had work to do, and the world was finally paying attention. As I walked out of that courthouse, I realized that Sabrina had been right about one thing all those years ago. I had been invisible in high school, hiding in shadows and hoping no one would notice me. But she had been wrong about everything else. Being invisible had never been my weakness. It had been my greatest strength. It had taught me to observe, to listen, to understand the world from perspectives that others could never see. It had given me the skills I needed to uncover truths that powerful people wanted to keep buried. Most importantly, it had taught me that the most dangerous people in the world are not the ones who demand attention. They are the ones who know how to disappear when they need to, who can slip through the cracks of society and emerge with stories that change everything. The invisible ones are the ones who see it all. And now, thanks to Sabrina Cole, the entire world knew that truth. My name is Amelia Hartmann. I am 35 years old, and I am an investigative journalist. 20 years ago, a girl called me invisible, and I spent every day since then proving that the invisible ones are the most dangerous of all. Because we are the ones who remember. We are the ones who watch. We are the ones who wait for justice to catch up with itself. And when it does, we are the ones who make sure the whole world is watching. The girl who called me invisible became the headline she could never escape. But more than that, she became proof that truth is the most powerful force in the universe, and that sometimes it takes 20 years to set things right. I am no longer invisible. I am inevitable. And there are still so many stories left to tell. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of transformation, justice, and the power of never giving up. Every story we tell proves that your past does not define your future. And sometimes the greatest victories come to those who wait for the perfect moment to strike back with truth.